Welcome to School Talk. I'm Nadja Varney, your host. What's the appropriate and really effective way to teach little children, maybe from birth all the way through to grade 3? Recently, a friend of mine was sharing her frustration because she was trying to teach her 5-year-old who's in kindergarten, not to teach him, but to do his homework. She said it took almost 2 hours to keep him on task. Is there something wrong with this? Today, we're going to talk about what is the appropriate and effective way to teach small children, actually from birth through 3rd grade. And my guest today is an expert in the field. He has told me off camera that he may be very expert in his knowledge, but he hasn't changed the world yet. And I understand that. And today we're going to hear his views, and we'll all get together and hopefully make a change in the way we're working with small children. My guest is Dr. Gregory Nelson. He's a professor of early education at Bridgewater State University. He's an author, and he's president of the Massachusetts Association of Early Childhood Teacher Educators. Welcome, Dr. Nelson.
It's good to be here.
I hope you don't mind my little statement there off the cuff, but we were talking earlier about, we talk about all these wonderful things we want to do for children, but the system seems to move so slowly, doesn't it, at times?
Oh, absolutely. Always has.
Well, I wondered, did that little scenario I painted about my friend and the little 5-year-old with homework taking almost 2 hours, did that upset you as much as it did me?
Well, it kind of mirrors my horror in visiting some kindergartens, not all, but some kindergartens with just right off the bat, just saying, we've got all this stuff to teach you, we've got all this stuff to teach you, so pay attention, do your work, blah, 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 and totally ignoring how children actually learn.
So you see, it's not only in home with the parent, but there are some disturbing things right in the classrooms.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, with so much controversy around early education, I understand that 3 major Massachusetts organizations got together: the Mass Department of Higher Ed, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, and your department, of course, the Department of Early Education and Care. And I understand they developed some standards and competencies, again, from birth through grade 3. And the document is called Building the Foundation for Future Success for Children from Birth through Grade 3. What led to this document, and what's the purpose of it?
Yeah, it's really a mouthful, but it grew out of something that's been going on much longer, which is the college to career readiness movement, which was happening in K-12, and that came from the notion, some of it was driven by the colleges just saying students are arriving here not ready, and employers were saying students are arriving on our doorsteps not having the skills they need. So it was considered kind of a crisis to kind of like shake up the system and achieve positive outcomes by grade 12. So as an offshoot of that, that what is written in those documents is kind of hard to translate to like preschool and kindergarten. And so they said early childhood has a role to play to set the foundations. So what is that role? What should the contribution of early childhood be to ultimate success by grade 12 in creating good citizens, good workers, and good college students?
So this might be an opportunity to really look more closely at what's happening in schools.
Yes, in part, what got me so enthusiastic about this document was it was really the first joint statement from Early Ed and Care and Elementary and Secondary Ed in terms of saying we both agree that this is what should be happening in early childhood, and that was radical, especially given the contents of the document.
Well, I'm not surprised to hear that, because I think when you were a guest some years ago, one of the things I remember you speaking about was this lack of a true flow from the early education. We saw the elementary model being used on small children, if I remember correctly.
Right.
Well, the report that we're talking about today emphasizes 5 domains, they call them, or 5 areas of development for children. And I wondered if I take several of these domains and kind of toss it to you to give a little explanation about what it means.
Okay.
I'll just give you the
Okay.
title. The first one I picked because everyone goes to school to learn things, and some people think you're just going to get facts, but I'm sure for early ed it means more than that. The domain is called Cognitive Development and General Knowledge.
Right. Which, as you say, is what has typically been considered the purpose for the classroom. And all of the curriculum frameworks, which kind of outline what is supposed to be achieved in each grade, largely focus upon those content domains and what should be achieved in kindergarten, what should be achieved in first grade, and so forth. So that kind of mirrors what already has been, and it says early childhood has a role to play. But if you read the document, it's not a long document, but if you read it, it talks about there are certain ways of approaching content knowledge that are appropriate to early childhood so that children actually grasp what the content is. But that's probably the same aspect of that document, that one right there.
When you say the same?
The same as what the emphasis has been within education up till now, especially in the public schools.
And are you referring somewhat to this whole focus on college career readiness type of?
Only tangentially, because the whole idea is that if you are only teaching content, you are not getting them ready for college and career.
Mm-hmm. Well, there has been, just thinking of the title, Cognitive Development, with new science we have understood more and more that children learn in different ways, and there need to be different ways for them to develop their knowledge and their cognition.
No, I totally agree that in fundamental ways we know that teacher designed and directed kind of do what I do and don't do anything else kind of things do not activate the brain in effective ways, and learning is marginal under those circumstances, but that's the primary teaching model. It's kind of tragic.
And I think it got, in my opinion, of course, I'm trying to interview you, but in my opinion, so much of the work that came with the tests that were imposed, I say, on all of American education, or even in Massachusetts, came more of that stereotypic lecturing. Because I had a second grade teacher who I taught with, and she was still teaching, and she said, I have to be on the same page for the whole class.
Right.
She knew better, but she said people wandering out to make sure we're making our progress.
Well, that's it, yeah, that the teachers almost aren't able to teach as well as they know how because they're under such pressure to get, immediate results on a fixed timetable, and they're just trying to cram stuff in so it all fits. It doesn't work.
What's so strange is that Psychology 101, we all learn at different rates, pace, speed.
Absolutely.
And yet we're all supposed to be ready on day one for that test.
Yeah, and that was, just parenthetically, when they switched to the Common Core, people have lots of feelings about it. But one thing that they did was, rather than doing age bands, they did grade by grade benchmarks, which flies in the face of what you just said. Mm-hmm. It says first grade teachers have to achieve these things, second grade teachers have to achieve these things, and it doesn't allow for any variability in learning rates.
And myself included, but the teachers I know, we were trying to be very creative. And some of the teachers who are creative and enthusiastic are leaving because it's like being in a straitjacket with what was going on.
True.
The second domain that I'd like you to talk about, if you would, was the language and communication development, because that was kind of my world with language and reading, learning reading.
Right.
So what are they expecting, or what does that domain mean in the report?
Well, I think traditionally that's been translated to early literacy, and one of the primary missions, supposedly, of early childhood was for children to be reading by grade 3.
There we go again.
And
everybody by second grade.
And so, that was it. And what you saw in the classrooms was get those foundational literacy things in and so forth. But what this is saying is that language and communication, which goes well beyond literacy, is important for children to be able to express themselves, for them to have things to say, for them to be able to listen and respond, not just to obey, but to take ideas and communicate them and react to them. That that we know within early childhood that literacy is going to come from strong language skills. And if you bypass that and go straight to literacy, you're just kind of cutting yourself off at the ankles.
It's kind of amazing to me. That was just a great explanation. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of children need to learn to listen and speak long before they need to read and write. And I see so many early grades where they want them to write, like the example I gave at the beginning.
Well, and sadly, I would add to what you just said, that teachers need to learn how to listen too. That to find out what to teach or to find out whether you've taught anything, there has to be dialogue going on. If it's all a one-way communication, you don't know if you've accomplished anything or not.
And I think that's been a cry from the teachers, that the tests that are sent down from Pearson or wherever, who knows whether we've actually taught these things or talked about them. So people are listening to teachers who should be able to develop some of the testing from what they're doing with the child.
And one of the early canaries in the coal mine was when those MCAS tests came out, that many of the questions had added on to them, explain your reasoning. And children were unable to do so because they'd never been asked to do that in school before.
Isn't that something? We talk about learning. Dr. Sizer, who I love to quote, said, schools are to learn to use your mind well, and not to just parrot back what people say. Well, staying on this language and communication for just a minute, though, because you can't, I don't know how you would measure on a test an early education, a child in the kindergarten or first grade, their listening and speaking skills. I mean, that's so important, but can they measure that on one of these tests?
Well, there are some sophisticated observational tools.
Yes.
I mean, obviously on a paper and pencil test, you can't do that very well. But you can assess competencies that are developing. Yes.
So the teachers from this report and some of the real lessons and so forth that you're producing with the report, that will help teachers to be able to assess some of that.
Yeah, especially if they loosen up their definition of what is acceptable assessment.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. I know when I was reading Resource Teacher, and I would test children who were coming in, and we'd be walking upstairs, and I'm trying to just hear informal conversation. Do you have any toys, Bobby? And the mother who's walking with us, oh, you've got plenty of toys. We have this, we have. And people don't know. We're trying to hear the child's language in an informal situation, you know. But let's go to another domain, the physical development and well-being.
Yes.
What does that include? We want kids to be physically well developed.
I mean, you've heard the horror stories of them trying to fit all the learning in that they need to do. So they've taken recess out of the schedule, or students who are falling behind have to stay in and work rather than go out. But it goes beyond that. I mean, certainly here we're talking about. We know that a child who is not fit, who is not healthy, who is not well nourished, who hasn't gotten enough sleep, that their brains are incapacitated. You can be the best teacher in the world and they're not ready to learn. We know from some of the brain gym stuff that if you don't take breaks every once in a while to physically recharge yourself and recenter yourself, your brain loses focus. All of these things we know. So they're saying that schools have a role to play in teaching what does keep us healthy, but that also they need to encourage those behaviors as part of what children experience in schools. Well,
we have to take a break right now, but we need a break. Speaking of break, we're going to recess. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Michael Adams? Here. Michael Adams.
Here.
Michael Adams.
Students who miss 18 days of school in any grade risk falling behind and not graduating. Absences add up.
Dr. Gregory Nelson, one of the areas that we don't often speak about relating to schools is children's social and emotional development, and that's one of the domains that's included in this report. So I wonder if you would talk about what are you referring to in that report when you say social and emotional development?
Well, for me, that's possibly the most exciting, part of what's been included. In many cases, what I've seen in the public sector has been, it kind of translates to children need to be well behaved and to be able to control themselves and to follow direction and that kind of thing. And those who are not socially and emotionally ready for school. And this is an entirely different thing. We're talking about what kind of person do you want your child to be when they grow up? Do you want them to be able to problem solve? Do you want them to be able to work with other people? Do you want them to be able to be self-directed in their learning? All of these kinds of things, rather than being controlled by other people. Do they develop those skill sets to be the ones that are in charge of their own community? If you think of all those children forming a community, should they be able to work together productively without a lot of teacher intervention? But that requires that the way you structure activities and the role the teacher plays is not one of the authority figure, but is the facilitator of the children's activity, and they are allowed to have more decision-making power. They're allowed to problem solve rather than be told exactly how to do things. They are scaffolded in their social relationships with other children. They are allowed to have social relationships with other children while they're engaged in learning activities, all of those kinds of things. So our big message has been learning standards are fine, but if you're teaching the wrong way, you're going to end up with a product that you're not satisfied. Those children are not being prepared to be good citizens, to be collaborative workers, to be ready to operate successfully when other people aren't giving them orders, any of those kinds of things. So it's not a new set of benchmarks of things to teach, although there is some intentional teaching required because the kids are so young, they don't automatically have those skills. But it's a matter of radically changing how classrooms run on a day-to-day basis so that those skills develop.
I remember one of the ILA's instructional learning assistants that was in my room for a while because she thought the children should be quiet. They're talking to each other. And I said, well, they're learning. I don't want them to just sit there and do some work and not find the answer and just put anything down. They may talk to each other. They may help each other. And we learned how, because first graders, kindergarten especially, we all talk loud. Right. So we learned how to lower our voices so we could have 3 and 4 groups going on with group leaders. It was just wonderful.
And one of our primary teaching techniques is, the kids are working on a problem and they say, well, I think the answer is this. And another child says, well, I think the answer is that. And the teacher stays out of it. The teacher refuses to say, you're right and you're wrong, and let the children engage in constructive dialogue and productive communication and reasoning so that the class as a whole can decide, did we get it right? And the teacher never does tell them whether they did or not. It was their job to figure it out.
This is not only close to the new, well, it's not new, but project-based learning is becoming much more popular.
Absolutely.
Dr. Okers was here talking about it. He's just, been a pioneer in that. But I think about what you mentioned the word citizens a few times for the little children, thinking of that. But if we only have people who, as you referred to, that just take orders, we're ready for, an authoritarian country. We need people who, as you say, can think and reason with one another.
And it's not just taking orders, it's being able to form your own judgment of the arguments that are presented to you.
Yes.
So you're not just swayed by, who's the most powerful or who gets your juices flowing the most.
Exactly.
Say, does what they're saying make sense?
I think we could maybe have early childhood education as we're talking about it for our whole country. That would help. Another domain or area that you have in your report for early childhood is approaches to play and learning. I love that. In fact, I was thinking back to the 60s and 70s when Evelyn Sharp's book came out, Thinking as Child's Play. I think it was based on Piaget's stages of development. Somehow, even if that wasn't all perfect and maybe pre what we know today, there was something much more human in those ideas, I found. So would you explain why it's important to include the play, the approach to play in learning? Most people think they play at home and they go to school to work.
Yeah. Well, obviously the word play has been used in early childhood for a long time. More troubling is that this is perhaps the first time that we've been able to work the word into a state document.
Congratulations.
As something that was not taken out in the editing process, because we're interested in learning here, not in play. Play has gotten a bad rap. Play has sometimes not been well defined because there are sophisticated kinds of play that actually do lead to learning, and there's kinds of play that are fairly aimless and inefficient. So we're not saying all play is a powerful learning tool, but play in general, which involves these things of the child having a say in what they're doing, the child being relaxed, the child being social, all of those kinds of things. We have been for several years pointing to such things as Costa has talked about the habits of mind of highly successful people. Armstrong has talked about the characteristics of genius, and we talk a lot about 21st century skills. If you look at the list of 21st century skills, it's that stuff that's in that approaches to play and learning, of curiosity and thinking outside the box and persistence and all of those kinds of things. So if you have a classroom where the children never get an opportunity to practice those skills, to develop those skills, not only do you have an impoverished learning environment, but you're developing a substandard human being. I mean, schools have been likened to operating the same way that prisons and insane asylums operate. That they have the same bureaucratic structures in place. That can't be a good thing.
Well, you know, if the structure was the same, but what went on inside a penitentiary should be very different from what a creative teacher is doing in her classroom, obviously. Well, I'm going back to the cognitive development and general knowledge domain, because similar to the play, it talks about that students should have active exploration, which kind of connects to this idea, to me, with play. Would you explain the importance of active exploration? It's kind of been involved in what you've been saying. And I wonder if you can give an example, let's say a first or second grade, and how they would use active exploration that would lead to good thinking and good reasoning, learning.
Okay. Yeah, I think it goes back to such things as Piagetian theory and constructivism. And it's not just active learning, it's hands-on, minds-on learning. And so the whole notion is that children cannot learn what you want to teach them if it's a complex concept by you telling it to them. That they have to come to an understanding of it within themselves. They have to construct an understanding. And to do that, they need to explore the topic. They need to ask questions. They need to try to find the answers to those questions. If they're wrong, then the activity itself should point out to them that their theory is not working, and they have to come up with another way of explaining or another way of testing. So if you're doing something simple like how magnets operate, I mean, you can structure something so that you just, show them, do this, this happens, do that, that happens. Let me show you something cool, now see if you can do it. But for children to actually work all that out for themselves, they'll end up with a deeper and more versatile form of understanding of magnetism than they would if you just taught them. The idea is, especially in domains like math and science, that it's not our job for us to tell them everything that math and science has taught us. It's to help them find out all those things. They want to be mathematicians. They want to be scientists. That's how we're going to get them good at math and science.
I remember early on, if you recall, I invited you here to talk about how to teach science
Yeah,
to young children.
I showed some of those things, yeah.
And you brought along, what was it that you brought along?
Did I bring the syringes?
Forget what you
I
brought.
forget what I
but
brought.
You just had very ordinary objects
Yeah.
to show how if you filled up this plastic bottle, it would, expand.
Yeah, well, I'm horrified at the price of science kits that have like $3 worth of materials in them, and you spend $300 to buy them.
I know, you just collected them at home.
Just use recyclables. You got the same thing if you know what you're doing.
Well, we're at the end right now, but I just wonder if very briefly you could tell me what is your greatest frustration and your hope for optimistic hope for the future?
Well, probably my greatest frustration is that it's fairly slow to turn that position statement into action plan. So as far as translating it into steps forward, that's slow in happening. My greatest, probably my greatest source of optimism recently is that there's been both an economic and political kind of awareness that has emerged in the last few months, just saying that investment in early childhood, serious investment in early childhood, is in the best interest economically of the state, and that it actually saves money overall to invest in early childhood. So if we can get that happening, good things are going to happen.
Right, first, finally people waking up to see that
I
it all
hope so.
starts
I
at
hope
early
so.
ed. Thank you so much, Dr. Greg Nelson. I
Thank you.
appreciate it so much. And in closing, I'm just going to share with you two quotations. One is from a Chinese proverb: "Tell me, I forget. Show me, and I remember. Involve me, and I understand." And a quote from Maria Montessori: "Free the child's potential, and you will transform him into the world." End quote. Words to ponder as we continue in our school talk.